Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air. This podcast is dedicated to the millions of family caregivers who want wellness tips and self-care solutions, who seek expert advice, and who want news about healthy aging and how to create well home design in our forever homes. I'm Sherri Snelling, a corporate gerontologist, author, and educator, a TV interviewer, host, and news commentator. I'm joining you from Southern California, where our interviews and news take us all across the country to explore the many ways to help you on your caregiving journey and to lift you up here at Caregiving Club On Air. Welcome to Caregiving Club On Air and our June episode, where we're going to focus on June's National Alzheimer's and Brain Health Awareness Month, as well as the National Day of Joy on June 26th. We're going to talk about staying hydrated, Employee Wellness Month, Dementia Friendly Design, Father's Day, and also World Music Month. I'm Sherri Snelling, your host and gerontologist and author. And we have really great interviews for this episode. We start with Saudia Gajadhar, who is the Chief Happiness Officer of Comfort Keepers. She's going to share with us the latest survey from their annual survey on happiness and positivity for National Day of Joy on June 26th. And then we're going to talk to Deborah Levy and Dr. Charles Wilcox of the Alzheimer's Association, where we're going to talk all things Alzheimer's caregiving, including the latest drug development, diagnostics, support, and all the things that you want to know about Alzheimer's for National Alzheimer's and Brain Health Awareness Month. As we dive into our Caregiver Wellness news, we're going to, again, look at Alzheimer's and caregiving, but also the physical wellness aspect of staying hydrated, which is National Hydration Day on June 23rd. We're going to talk a little bit about Father's Day and the difference between caring for moms and dads. And then we're going to switch to Well Home Design News, where I will share with you some information from our free webinar that we're offering to our podcast listeners on Dementia Friendly Design. And also June's National Employee Wellness Month, where I'll share an excerpt from my book, Me Time Monday, the intellectual wellness chapter, where I talk about life-work balance using biophilic design in both your home and your office. And as always, we end our episode with our Me Time Monday wellness hack. This one is on musical menus and sonic seasoning, where we combine eating and dining with music, all for, again, Alzheimer's Brain Health Awareness Month, as well as World Music Month. So stay with us for that wellness hack. It's really interesting. But for now, let's take a look at our Caregiver Wellness news. So for Caregiver Wellness news, I want to start with, as we mentioned earlier, June is National Alzheimer's and Brain Health Awareness Month. And just a couple months ago, the Alzheimer's Association came out with their Facts and Figures report, which they do every year, updating the statistics and new information. We now know that nearly 7 million Americans are living with Alzheimer's or a related dementia. We also know that about 11 million Americans are caregiving for those with Alzheimer's or dementia. And the prevalence of the disease is going to almost double over the next 2 to 3 decades. We're going to have about 13 million people in the US who will have this disease. So it's kind of, it's on our radar now. It's, top of mind for so many. It's still a very scary diagnosis because there's no cure. And because of the nature of the disease, in the fact that not only is there memory loss, but there can very often be behavioral and personality changes, lack of communication, and just an overall kind of degeneration sometimes with quality of life. Although I would advocate that throughout all the stages of this disease, even though it does progress and get worse over time, there is still quality of life that we see in a lot of dementia adults who are in the later stages of the disease. They still get happiness and feel comfort with multisensory inputs. So those are things like smell, taste, touch, visual, sight cues, and all of those things are really important. So it's something to definitely think about for those of us who are caregivers, whether it's rubbing lotion on our loved ones' hands, brushing their hair, bringing in the sense of maybe the season or their favorite dish of cooking, having greenery and beautiful colors that we can look upon, and playing music. We know that music, and of course, June is also World Music Month, which is perfect because music is such a powerful therapeutic tool for Alzheimer's. And it's something that, family caregivers need to really educate yourself around, because the music memory is one of the last memories that Alzheimer's adults keep. And it's pretty amazing to watch. If you haven't seen the documentary Alive Inside, it's so powerful. Or, we've talked before on this podcast about I think it was the 60 Minutes interview with Tony Bennett at the end of his life, where he really could not carry on a conversation. But the minute that the music started playing, he was the Tony Bennett that we've all known through the decades. So that music memory inside the brain is really powerful. And it's a great tool for all of us to keep in mind, but particularly for those with Alzheimer's. So, one of the things I found really interesting, there was a Wall Street Journal article. I'm going to share the link on our episode guide page, but it really talked about Alzheimer's not being a disease of older people, because that's what we think, right? You don't get it until you're older, 70s, 80s or beyond. That's what we think. But the reality is that a lot of the lifestyle choices that we can make early in life, and I'm talking 20s and 30s, can actually reduce our risk of developing Alzheimer's later in life. So it really isn't an older person's disease. Yes, maybe that's when we get diagnosed and that's where we see, the impact of the disease. But it's something that, first of all, we know that most people, even upon diagnosis, have been living with the disease between 10 and 20 years. But even before that, there are things we can do to try to decrease that risk. So it's really important to understand a lot of the lifestyle factors. And I have a whole chapter in my book, Me Time Monday, that talks about this. There's also other great books. We're going to be talking to Dr. Charles Wilcox in a minute, who's an Alzheimer's Association board member. He has a great book out that we'll mention. By the way, all the proceeds of that book go to the Alzheimer's Association, which is really great. But I just think it's really interesting to change the way we look at the disease, not just think of it as an older person's disease. This is a lifestyle disease that we might have a little bit more control over than we originally think or are thinking about. Now, one of the areas that really helps brain health that we may not think about is staying hydrated, right? We know with older adults that a lot of the things that we're seeing, dizziness, delirium, cognitive fading, can sometimes be related to hydration. 50% of Americans of all ages are dehydrated. So good. Okay. We need to stay hydrated because it not only helps our brain health, it helps our overall body health. So, there's a couple of things. I wrote a chapter in my book, Me Time Monday book, called Nature's Cleanse, which is really about using water to really give yourself that deep cleanse that we need throughout our body for physical health. We know that if you're just 1% dehydrated, it's going to have a 5% impact on your cognitive functioning. So in other words, the more dehydrated you are, the less your brain is going to perform properly. So we know that there's a deep connection between this. The National Academy of Medicine says women should drink 91 ounces and men should drink about 120, 124 ounces of water a day, much more than the old-fashioned 64 ounces a day, 8 ounces, 8 cups or whatever that we used to talk about. So it's a much higher level of intake of water every day. And by the way, it doesn't include every liquid. So if you're drinking a beer, or if you're drinking coffee, or if you're drinking soda, that doesn't count. We're talking about water, folks. Okay, that's really the prescription here, if you will. Now, there's another way to look at how much you need, and I like personalized medicine. I don't like the one size fits all. Here's the number. It works for everybody. Because let's face it, all of our bodies are physically different. We all have, different reaction to different things. We are different sizes, different ages. We might need things a little differently. So I like personalized formulas. And one of the personalized formula for hydration is to take your weight and turn that into a number. So let's just say you weigh 160 pounds. Okay, so 160. Now, cut that in half, 80. That's the number of ounces that you should be drinking every day to optimize your water intake. That's a little bit more personalized than just the numbers I threw out there from the National Academy of Medicine. Now, the caveat is, of course, if you are on medications or you're experiencing something called edema, which is water retention, can happen with pregnant women, can happen again with people who are older, who maybe are not as active, have a little bit more neuropathy in their feet, and so they have a little bit more swelling, maybe around the ankles or other joints. Or you're an athlete, a pro or an amateur athlete, and you're sweating a lot, that's going to impact how much water you really need. So for the medical issues I mentioned, always talk to your doctor about how much hydration you really should be getting. For those pro-am weekend warriors and workout queens out there, there's something really great called, I came across the Swenty, I think is how it's pronounced, the Swenty wearable. It's a patch, just like a nicotine patch, but it's a patch you put on your arm when you're working out. And what it does is it regulates how much water you need after your workout to replenish your body. So again, a very personalized way of looking at that. But I thought that was kind of cool. I wanted to bring that to your attention because I know a lot of you are using a lot of these new technologies and wearables and all that. Now, turning to Father's Day, which of course is June 17th. I do a lot of employee webinars on communication for caregivers. How do we talk to our older parents about long-term care, end-of-life wishes? How do we have conversations around driving? How do we have conversations around where to live and all of those types of things? And so I'm kind of immersed in this communication world and have been for most of my career. And I wrote an article for PBS Next Avenue about how to talk to moms versus dads. I think in general, what we need to think about as family caregivers is that dads, as they grow older, are still looking to maintain their independence and control. And that's not to say that moms aren't as well, but that's really where their focus is. So we have to think about that when we're having conversations, not to jeopardize that or, talk negatively about taking away control or independence, because that's really where their goals are as they age. For moms, it typically tends to fall more in the safety and security bucket. I maybe I'm living alone now because, I'm widowed or divorced. I want to stay safe. I want to stay secure. I want to have both. I think parents want to have better quality of life, but it's a slight nuance, and it's a way to use language in the proper way. And I'm going to have a link to the article so you can read a little bit more about that. And of course, for those of you out there who are HR benefits and HR directors, I do a lot of educational webinars for employees, and that's one of them is the communication piece of it. So that's for Father's Day. That's just our little quick note to Father's Day. And I want to just do a shout out to my late dad and my late stepdad, who really raised me. Two wonderful men, gave me great gifts, very different gifts for my life, but I'm just so grateful that I had that relationship. And what you're going to hear now from Saudia is of Comfort Keepers is how adult children are looking at their relationship with their older parents, and some really wonderful, positive, happy, joyful findings from the National Day of Joy survey that Comfort Keepers does every year. I mean, we need more of this, folks, right? I'm here to bring you news and great interviews, but also we're here to uplift people and our listeners. And I always love to do this interview with Saudia because it's so much focused on the positive. There's a lot of bad news out there about social media impacts and, other things that are going on. But this is a twist and a turn on let's focus on that positive happiness factor. So here is my interview with Saudia Gajadhar of Comfort Keepers. So I am so thrilled to have our guest on, who is Saudia Gajadhar, who is the Chief Happiness Officer of Comfort Keepers. I've always said I love that title. I think it's the best title out there. But Saudia is joining us again this year She was on with us last year to tell us about the latest survey that Comfort Keepers has just done for their National Day of Joy coming up on June 26th. Saudia, welcome back to Caregiving Club On Air.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for including me today.
Yeah, of course. Well, this is always such a great, conversation, and we get to talk about lots of good, positive stuff that's happening. But, before we dive into the survey results, just again for our audience, tell us a little bit about what Comfort Keepers does, what kind of services that you provide for older adults and family caregivers.
Oh, yes, of course. So, Comfort Keepers is a leading provider of in home care for seniors and any adults that need assistance in being able to stay in the comfort of their own homes. So, whether that's mobility assistance, transportation, maybe nutrition, errands, any of those types of things, we help with that, medication reminders. But Comfort Keepers is different than other in home care providers because we focus on joy, connection, positivity. We like to say we like to focus on what's possible instead of limitations. And we think that makes a real difference in people's lives that, maybe that's something they're so excited to hear about when usually it's sometimes a negative experience to think about when your parents might start needing in-home care. The adult children that we work with, they are trying to figure it out. They're struggling. They're trying to understand how best to navigate their parents aging. And lots of times they're not as prepared because there's just not a lot of conversations out there in this country about how to help your aging loved ones, sort of navigate their later years. They just want to stay positive. We know that those adult daughters who tend to be the one who are more often going to be that primary family caregiver, they are struggling with what to do. They just want to stay that adult daughter. They want to maintain that relationship. So that's one of the things that we try to focus on the most is again, maintaining that possibility, that positivity, and that's such a welcome message. So it's so interesting because I am actually an adult daughter of, older parents myself. My mom's 80, my dad's 89. My mom, she's so great. Our family heritage is that my parents are from Guyana in South America. And so we have a lot of, it's a very Indian heritage and culture. So the very favorite thing that my mom makes for me is curry. We live in different states on different coasts. So I don't get to see her all that often. So when I see her, we just like to do some of those things that we love. And she loves to make curry for me. It's my favorite dish. And I love it. But so my mom, even though she's in good health, she's had 3 knee replacements, if you can count that. And she actually needs another one. So I really want her not to be in pain. So cooking curry is very involved. And I have really just struggled with having her do that for me. I'm like, Mom, no, let's go out to dinner. Let me cook for you or let me help you. And she just would get really mad, Sherri. And she would be like, no, I'm really making it for you. And then I think it's actually the work that we started doing with Comfort Keepers that made me realize that the best thing I could do for her is let her be that mom and take care of me. So now it's fine. I have no guilt. I let her make me curry. She cooks, she cleans up, and I have to sit in a chair, and that's what she wants. And it has brought her so much joy. You can totally see the benefit of why that's important.
Yeah, and I love that story, and I'm so glad that you shared that with us. We've talked before. My mom's turning 80 this year too.
Mhm.
Hope she doesn't mind that I'm telling her age here, but I think there's something about when our parents get older, we're so focused on their physical health, we forget that the social, side of health, which is staying connected with us, doing the things they've always loved to do, is so important for our older parents. And you don't want to take that away. I mean, it might be a little tougher, like you said, for your mom to be on her feet while she's cooking and cleaning up, but it brings her joy. And that is really kind of the topic of the day today that we're going to talk about. And I think it's wonderful that Comfort Keepers also focuses on that because again, we often think of, a home care agency is coming in and thinking about the health and the medical issues that the older adult has, and not necessarily always thinking about their social health and their emotional health, which you guys really focus on and is really terrific. So let's dive into the survey. Now, this is the 6th year that you've been doing this survey around joy and happiness, and it is for the National Day of Joy, which we'll kind of talk about at the end. But tell us a little bit about this year's survey and what were some of the key findings that you saw?
Yeah, well, we started doing the survey because we established this annual Day of Joy 6 years ago. Because we wanted our brand promise is elevating the human spirit, which is really, again, about that joy, the connection, the positivity. And for us, having a day, and for it's the last Wednesday of June every year. And so this year it is on June 26th. So sometimes we do this accompanying survey to just showcase and validate the importance of positivity in our everyday lives, because people forget as you're going around your day-to-day life, gosh, maybe I just need to stop and take a minute. So this year's theme is the power of positivity for all the reasons that we just talked about. We actually surveyed 2,000 adults this year, and focusing on positivity, it just helped us, and it gave us a few key insights that I think are really helpful. It's really important to remember what positivity does for us, not only mentally, but physically, because I guarantee it doesn't matter how old we are, we all want the same things in our lives. Whether you're 20, 30, 40, 50, or 60, you want joy, you want positivity, you want love, you want purpose, your connection. And I guarantee you that doesn't change when you become 70 or 80. You just don't all of a sudden, like, no, I don't need that anymore. I just want to be kept safe and secure in my home. We know that's not true. But sometimes we, as industry professionals or adult children, we sort of forget that for a minute, right? And because we are so focused on solving this problem of making sure that our loved ones don't fall or something bad doesn't happen to them, that we start thinking about them as a problem to be solved instead of that whole person. And the moment you step back and thinking about the love and the joy and all those things and the memories that they can still make, it can make a huge difference. So, for example, we know that social isolation can actually be as bad for somebody as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's AARP research that tells us that. So it's profound, the physical power of positivity. And you know this more than anybody. So we know that socialization and interaction and little moments of joy actually increases longevity. It can actually reduce depression and actually reduce falls. It can actually, it can prolong, or, it can actually help with Alzheimer's and dementia in terms of, reducing how fast that will, take effect.
Yeah, and I love that because again, even with our own selves, as we think about getting older and everything, when you're surrounded by messaging that makes you feel more frail, more vulnerable, people are treating you like, here, let me help you with everything. It almost like reinforces a helplessness, right? Whereas staying vital and just helping people where they need help. But again, that positivity, I think, is so key. Now, a couple of findings that I want to get to that I really loved. First of all, you did or found in the survey that there was a great percentage of adult children who consider their older parent their best friend. I love that because I think of my mom as my best friend. But tell us a little bit about that and also some of the other key findings that you had.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, more than half of adult children report that their parent is their best friend. I just love hearing that. I was actually surprised to hear that that was such a high percentage. But then, literally, as soon as we got those survey results, I was speaking with one of my colleagues, and she was actually telling me that her grandmother is her best friend, literally her best friend. And that was great to hear. She was telling me about some of the traditions because, when you hear a stat like that, it's so important to think about how just to maintain those social connections and how important it is, and the positive benefits on you as the adult child in terms of your happiness and your connection, as well as on that senior loved one. So my colleague was telling me that every Sunday she gets on a call or a Zoom with her grandmother and they watch TV together at the same time, so synchronized watching. And they were recently watching the entire series of Downton Abbey because that's what her grandmother really loved. And I
I
just
love that.
so much. And some of those things in that best friends, it's born out of those traditions that it's so important to keep and remember. So for her, she was just reminiscing about how she would, I guess, prepare the long beans on the porch with her grandmother all the time, and some of those warm traditions that sort of created that bonding that had led to that just really awesome Sunday night that she just never misses.
Well, and again, it's not like, Grandma, how are you feeling? Grandma, let me help you do this. It's creating these new memories, right?
Yeah,
That we
exactly.
get. And I think both sides really benefit. We've seen so many studies that show that, grandparents who spend more time with their grandchildren the older adult feels more relevant. They feel like they can share their wisdom, of living longer with their young grandkids. And the grandkids actually get a better sense of resiliency because they know who they are, where they came from. They hear about the stories of how grandma and grandpa, walked to school in the snow. That's like the famous story. We always hear it on
Yeah.
Reality, right?
Both
But
ways uphill.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The thing is that it kind of it says to us, okay, other people have struggled and had challenges as well, but they got through it. And I think that's such a great message. Other things that I just want to touch on here is some of the interesting findings that the adult children didn't realize maybe that their parent had done this or played a musical instrument or whatever.
Yeah.
So tell us about that finding. That was really great.
Yeah. So we know that actually over half of them said that they learned new things about their parents. And so some of them were really surprising, like maybe there was something significant in their personal lives, like they were married or maybe had a significant other that they never knew about. Many of them actually said that their parent had participated in a historical event. Actually, most commonly, it was World War II, which is such an interesting finding. And I think this one is cute that a lot of them didn't even know that their parents actually had hidden little keepsakes from their past that they kept, or that they had hidden talents like singing or dancing or something like that, which it's just so great to think about all the things you don't know, because again, you think about your parent is a whole person with memories and all those joys and everything that you are, but sometimes you just forget that they lived those full, really interesting and adventurous lives. And there's we talked about the benefit to us as adult children and others. Actually, 88% of them said that doing activities with their aging loved one or their parent actually helped give them a positive impact. So we knew that there was such a benefit to that. It's really it's just profound.
Well, I think that's great because, again, I think sometimes we look at aging as, it's this decline, it's about disease or disability or whatever, and it doesn't obviously have to be. There's been other studies that have been done that show that we actually are happiest in our late 70s and 80s, even happier than when we were in our 20s, which always is a little surprising, but that U curve of happiness is something that a lot of people talk about. The US Surgeon General just came out with a report actually today that talked about social media and the impact on teens, and the fact that teens are spending anywhere between 4 and 8 hours a day on social media. And this is really exacerbating a lot of the mental health issues. Now, I want to flip that script because you actually found some really positive aspects of social media to help older adults stay connected to their loved ones. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, for sure. We talked about, the impact on the teens. Social media is a great way for teens to bond with their grandparents because, believe it or not, our seniors are on social media. 3/4 of those adult children say that they use social media to stay connected to their parents. Their parents are on social media, even at, more advanced years. And 2/3 of them say that their parents actually use social media to stay connected to people from their past. They get it. Mm-hmm. So they are, that stimulation of your memory and the things that are important to you and it has such a positive impact on our brains. They say that their seniors actually use social media to learn about new things. So there's a positive benefit to that.
And we know the lifelong learning piece is another, again, it's that positive looking forward that helps keep us living longer and living healthier and happier. It's interesting that you say they connect with people maybe from their past. I remember years ago, I had done a TV pilot, and it was with a World War II veteran who had been at the Battle of the Bulge. Wow. And he actually he got a little computer coaching from his grandson, and he was able to reconnect with his buddies that had been in that battle in World War II with him that he hadn't spoken to in, 50 or 60. Yeah, it was just amazing. So you're right. There's that power of technology to connect us, which I think is really positive. And hopefully we could just restrain people from, feeling the negative impacts of social media. I think if you can take a lesson from your grandparents, it's that, don't sweat the small stuff and use it to connect, but not to feel bullied or anything else that's going on. We talk about positivity, and that really was the focus of your survey and the focus of what Comfort Keepers does. Tell us a little bit about some of those findings and why is that important for our overall health and longevity?
Yeah, actually, you hear so much about people dreading their older years or dreading aging, and there's some negative perceptions about it. So it was so great to hear the opposite in this survey, because 2/3 of adult children said that their parents had a positive attitude about aging. And that was flipped into several very tangible things. Number one, it improved their mood. The adult children reported that. It made their parents want to be more active because they felt more positive about what was going on with their lives, and also that they wanted to try new things. So those were three very important things that I think that being positive actually can help facilitate and foster in our senior loved ones. And again, all of that actually helps to improve longevity. Those little moments of positivity and joy and all of that mindset can actually help us thrive and live later in life.
Yeah. And so now let's kind of shift gears a bit. I want to talk a little bit about the activities around National Day of Joy and what Comfort Keepers helps create for that special day. And again, going back to the survey, I noticed that there were some concerts that older adults and their parents go to together. You mentioned the cooking with your mom, and that's such a special, aspect of family life and all that. But tell us a little bit about what are the activities then that you're helping to promote and kickstart on the National Day of Joy on June 26th.
So we have offices all over the country, and over 100 of them are celebrating in all kinds of different ways. And some of the fun things that are doing are, one office is having a joy ride on the water, like a joy cruise, complete with music and entertainment. We have a lot of offices doing things like ice cream socials, luau's, actually taking ice cream trucks out into the community, even with seniors, et cetera, which is great. We have garden parties. We have actually, my favorite one is senior proms. We have a couple offices doing senior proms this year, complete with kings and queens and the whole deal. And we would just ask that everybody think about on June the 26th to stop and remember how important joy is for you and others. Do something, first of all, to bring yourself joy, whether it's something big or something small, and then do something to bring joy to others. And let's think about all the joy and positivity we could spread. And you know what? We would love it if you would post about it on social media and use the hashtag National Day of Joy so we can see what an impact and how far our message is spreading.
What I love about that, and you celebrate this at least, every year, obviously, and we want to have those moments or have those activities we can look forward to. I think it becomes so important as we get older. Again, it's great to certainly connect and visit and stay socially connected and all that, but to have an event that you're looking forward to as you get older and there's not as many of those events around, to me is just, that's kind of this whole surge of joy to be able to have something like that to plan for and to get excited about, which is wonderful. And you guys are so great for doing that. Is there anything else, Saudia, that we didn't cover, maybe on activities or anything from the survey that we missed that's really important?
I think that those are the most important things. Again, it's the theme is the power of positivity. If you remember nothing else, remember that little moment of ways that you can stay positive and help your senior loved ones stay positive will make such a difference in every single aspect of their life and their longevity.
And that is a great message for all of us.
Yeah,
It's great for our
me
elders. It's a
too.
great,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. I was going to say anybody listening to this podcast is going to get something out of that. So tell us again where our listeners can find information about Comfort Keepers and the National Day of Joy.
Oh, for sure. Just go to comfortkeepers.com. We actually have the survey there with some information about the National Day of Joy. And you can learn more about Comfort Keepers and how it is that we bring joy to others, how we our caregiving services, and also where you can find us because we're in offices all over the country.
Which is so terrific. And again, it's just such a pleasure to have you back to talk about joy, because what a great topic. It's one of my favorite topics. And, we'll have you back next year to tell us what the survey results are next year. But thank
That's
you,
great.
Saudia,
Thank
for
you so
joining
much.
us.
This brings me joy.
Yeah, me too. All right. Have a great one.
Bye-bye.
So I just love that interview with Saudia. It was so uplifting and makes you feel good to know that, the strong family bonds are really important in life, certainly helping all of us live longer, healthier, and happier, but particularly important for our older adults. Now we're going to turn to our next interview, which is actually with two people. As I mentioned, Deborah Levy, who is the executive director of the Alzheimer's Association Orange County in Southern California, as well as Dr. Charles Wilcox, who is a board member for the Alzheimer's Association of Orange County, but he's also a clinical researcher and the author of this book. I'm going to hold it up. It's Demystifying the Alzheimer's Maze. And I just mentioned that all the proceeds from Dr. Wilcox's book goes to the Alzheimer's Association. So this is a double bonus. If you want to learn everything you wanted to know about Alzheimer's and make a donation to Alzheimer's, buy Dr. Wilcox's book. Most of us who are authors are out there, we're promoting our books and, hoping to do good and share good information. But this is actually even going further than that with Dr. Wilcox's book, which is really great. But this is going to be a great interview for those of you who are interested in Alzheimer's and dementia and caregiving and all the things that are happening in the Alzheimer's world. We're going to try to touch upon as many things as possible in this short interview, but here we go with Deborah Levy and Dr. Wilcox. So I'm really thrilled to have actually two very special guests on for our next segment, where we're going to focus on a discussion around Alzheimer's disease. We have Deborah Levy, who is the executive director of the Alzheimer's Association of Orange County in Southern California. And we also have Dr. Charles Wilcox with us, who is a board member of the Alzheimer's Association in Orange County, also an advocate for AIM, which is the Policy and Advocacy division or group in the Alzheimer's Association. And he's also been a clinical researcher in Alzheimer's disease for over 40 years. So welcome to both of you to Caregiving Club On Air.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Sherri, for having us.
Well, it's great to have you both. And as I said, as June is, Alzheimer's and Brain Health Awareness Month, we thought it's a perfect time to bring you both on. So we have a bonus of having both of you today. But I want to start first, Deborah, with you because a lot of people that are engaged in Alzheimer's caregiving say that they wish they'd known about the Alzheimer's Association when they were a caregiver. They discover it sometimes afterwards. But tell us a little bit tell our listeners, what are the supports and programs that you can provide to caregivers who have a loved one with Alzheimer's or dementia?
Well, first of all, I want to just mention that we are in communities across the country because we are the Alzheimer's Association. So we have chapters in all 50 states, and we really do believe that we're in all communities. We serve about 7 million Americans living with the disease, and there are 11 million caregivers every year. As I mentioned, we have a presence in all 50 states through our local chapter offices. We also collaborate with many tribal organizations as well. And the Alzheimer's Association partners with about 30 national and over 900 local organizations across the country to address the health inequities in underserved and underrepresented communities. And some of the services that we provide, education programs. I'd love to dive in a little bit deeper about our 24/7 helpline. We have support groups. We have a trial match program so that if somebody is diagnosed with the disease, we can help them navigate that clinical trial process. But the biggest thing I want folks to know is that wherever they live in the country, we can support them.
Which I think is tremendous. And, you mentioned the 24/7. I think a lot of times, caregivers are looking for good information and they don't always realize that there's also resources out there to help them, guide them on this journey, which we know can be a long one with Alzheimer's. Tell us just quickly about that 24/7 hotline.
So it is 24/7. I'm going to give the number out. It's 800-272-3900. And you can be calling if you're in a crisis moment. You can call for a referral. So whether you need to find long-term care or a physician in your community, You can call just to talk to somebody if you're recently diagnosed and you're a person living with the disease trying to navigate it. The helpline is confidential. We provide crisis assistance. We'll be able to provide local resources and information to individuals. We have master's level clinicians who can answer the calls as well. And the other thing that I want to mention is that we can answer calls in over 200 different languages. So whatever language somebody is most comfortable in, hopefully we're able to help them in that native language.
Which, it's so fantastic to have that type of resource. And I really hope our listeners are taking note and writing this down for themselves or other family members or friends. I just sat in on a caregiving task force meeting with the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers, and it was with employers. And the number one thing that employees are asking for is care navigation. Help me figure out the resources. Give me that trusted confidence, that I'm being connected to the best. And that's exactly what you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Wilcox, I want to turn to you because, there's so much that we could cover, and we're going to try to tackle a few of the topics today. But, a lot of the statistics right now, the latest Alzheimer's Association report that came out says there's nearly 7 million Americans now who have Alzheimer's or related dementias. We know that number will almost double to 13 million over the next couple, 3 decades. But there's a higher risk, if you will, in the African American and Latino communities. And also we know 2/3 of all Alzheimer's adults are women. Tell us a little bit about those special populations, and why do you think those populations have more risk, or we're finding more prevalence of the disease there? What do we know?
Well, we're learning more and more about that, Sherri, especially some of the research being done by the Alzheimer's Association. With respect to the African American community, there's at least 3 kind of cohort contributing factors, beginning with there's a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease in the African American community, which in turn leads to risk factors that go on to dementia. Also, you may recall from your days at USC, there's a gentleman there named Dr. Caleb Finch, who's done a lot of research on pollution. And when we look back over the years, many African American communities are in places or people who lived or still live in areas where there's more pollution by industry. And then thirdly, we also believe that to some extent it may be socioeconomic, where if you've been to Whole Foods lately, you can see that buying healthy food is very expensive. So with respect to the African American community, we think those are 3 contributing factors. With respect to Latinos, according to the National Institutes of Health, the Latino community does have a statistically significantly higher rate of obesity, which in turn leads to 2 other big risk factors: diabetes, cardiovascular disease, which in turn leads to higher chances for dementia. The good thing is, for both of those communities, some of these things are definitely modifiable risk factors. So it's probability, but it's not certain destiny. So there are things we can do, as Deb mentioned, reaching out to these underserved communities. With respect to women, there's a little good news on that front. First off, I think over the years, one of the reasons why it was such a dramatic difference was longevity. Women were living longer. But on the positive end, what we're finding is amongst those risk factors, one very important one is education. And 50, 60, 70 years ago, women were not getting access to education like men. Now, over the last 20 years, when we look at data, that gap is narrowing as women get more and more access to education. And if we look at young people today in their 20s and 30s, I think women are actually passing men in terms of education and advanced education and things. So while women still are more likely, higher probable, the gap is narrowing for good reasons.
Right. So the message is stay in school
Yes.
and keep up with that lifelong learning, I guess. So explain for our listeners, because so often I get questions about what's really the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's. And we're hearing so much more now. Bruce Willis, the famous actor, originally was diagnosed with aphasia and then ultimately with frontotemporal dementia. Tell us a little bit about what is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's, and then how many different types of dementia are out there?
Yeah, that's a really important question because it does seem, depending upon which expert panel you're listening to, it could be anywhere from 5 to 7 to 9 different types of dementia. One that's very rare, but I remember as a child hearing about was when people, they call it punch drunk. That's a fancy term called dementia pugilistica, where boxers get so many hits to the head, they get dementia. We're looking at now in NFL football players. But in general, to answer that question more directly, Sherri, is that dementia is the umbrella term, much like someone says, I have cancer. Well, immediately you wonder, do they have breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon cancer? Well, depending, again, which expert we listen to, probably about 70 to 75% of dementia is DAT, dementia of the Alzheimer's type. Now, our organization, the Alzheimer's Association, has kind of changed the slogan for the last 10 or 15 years, mentioning that we want to help serve all types of dementia in our research and in our outreach as well. But again, the highest probability is about 70, 75% is dementia of the Alzheimer's type.
And then tell me a little bit about MCI, because I get a lot of questions on, is MCI actually dementia? And how is that different then from Alzheimer's or other dementias?
Right. And it is finally now getting more publicity where people, I mean, even use the term MCI, mild cognitive impairment. Some of the literature I looked at before said about 40% of people who demonstrate the symptoms of MCI go on to develop dementia of the Alzheimer's type. If we have time for it later, we might talk about some of the new medications that have come out and things like that, where they're actually on that cusp, where people have this mild cognitive impairment. And probably one of the main distinguishing characteristics between MCI and dementia of the Alzheimer's type would be the degree to which people are really having serious impairments. To wit, it's not that serious yet. Many people are still at work. They have coping mechanisms, but it is kind of a warning signal that more severe symptomatology could be not too far down the line.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the new diagnostic tools and discoveries and things like biomarkers and blood tests and all that. And I know the Alzheimer's Association, beyond all of the wonderful programs and supports and everything, it also provides funding for research. So let's dive into that. And Deborah, you can also jump in here on the research funding that the Alzheimer's Association does. But I'd love to know, what are the newest, latest tests that maybe we should all be looking forward to determine whether or not we may have early signs of dementia?
Chuck, Dr. Wilcox, I'm going to pop in and just
Absolutely.
high level before you get into some of the details.
Please
share with your listeners that, we, the Alzheimer's Association, accelerate global research. That is one of the things that we're known for. Currently, we're investing $405 million in over 1,100 active best of field dementia projects in 56 countries, spanning almost all of the continents. Right now, we're in 6 of the continents. Charles and I are both from the Orange County, California community. Locally in California, we're investing about $62 million in research that's being conducted in the state of California. So now, Chuck, I'll hand it over to you.
Sure. And I'm glad you brought that up, Deb, because it really it resonates, I think, with everyone, the fact that this is a global disease, tragic disease, and challenge for everyone. One of the things the Alzheimer's Association did probably 15 years ago was a collaboration between, I forget which Nordic country it was, Norway or Sweden, and the University of Washington, looking at modifiable risk factors. And the research they did on that was aerobic exercise. And they found people who did aerobic exercise 30 minutes or more, 3 days a week or more, versus people who did stretching or other things, really showed less cognitive decline and more cognitive reserve by that aerobic exercise. So with respect to some of the new things that are ongoing right now, and I think you mentioned, Sherri, biomarkers and things like that, that is a game changer. It is a wonderful, wonderful thing that's come out. At the 2023 Alzheimer's International Conference, our association made a policy statement where they didn't feel just yet that these biomarkers were ready for layperson commercial development and access to the public. But of course, the developers of those have not all agreed with that, and they do have them commercially available now. As a quick example, there's a company affiliated with St. Louis University called C2N Diagnostics, and they have a test called Percivity, and they're looking at biomarkers as well. It's about $1,250, but they have a sliding scale. And what we're trying to do here, Sherri, is we know that Alzheimer's, unlike having a stroke or heart attack, is not an acute event. It's a 10, 15, 20-year on-ramp. So if we can get warning signs earlier, before people have signals, we can look at these modifiable risk factors. We can look at medications. We can look at things like taxes, defer, or more importantly, not to make light of it, if we can do things to delay this to the point where people don't even see the symptoms till they're in their 80s or 90s, or maybe not at all, that will be a true game changer. And these blood-based biomarkers and other types of biomarkers, I think will get us there. I really do.
And so are we able to do those blood tests today, or are they still a little bit out in the future?
We are able to do them today. As I say, they are commercially available. For example, Quest Labs has one called AD Detect. In fact, in 2023, when I published my book, it was $500. Now it's already down to $350 because it's being used more and more. And there's actually a skin test. I think it's called Synapse. They have Medicare approval. That's about $2,200 for the first test and $500 for the verification. But that's a skin test that will let people know, they say, with between 90 and 95% probability. And then again, I say Roche has a diagnostic test. There's about 5 or 6, but many more in the pipeline coming. And FDA is looking at them and giving them fast track status because, it's like those who might have heart disease in their family. You wouldn't dare go to the doctor and not get your cholesterol and triglycerides checked for maybe $20, $30. If we can get to that for these blood-based biomarkers for Alzheimer's and other dementia, that is going to be truly a paradigm shift that's beyond all recognition. It will be wonderful.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I probably would rather take a blood test than get a PET scan. That would just be me personally. But anyway, Deborah, you were going to say something.
No, I was wondering, Chuck, if you would talk about maybe the two drugs that are currently on the market, and one that has FDA advisory approval, and just that they're not cures for the disease, but for some individuals right now, we finally have some treatments on the market that can slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease. And so maybe you could talk about that too.
You bet. And this is, again, very recent news, with the most recent one being Monday, June 10th, the AdCom, which is a fancy term for Advisory Committee at FDA, voted 11-0, unanimously recommending approval of Eli Lilly's DMT, sorry for these acronyms, disease-modifying treatment called donanemab. Now, that's a drug and a company, Lilly, they've been working in this space for 28 years. This will be their first success, donanemab. And that drug, along with the first disease-modifying treatment that's commercially available, lecanemab, called Leqembi. That's marketed by a company called Eisai. They manufacture the biggest selling drug for Alzheimer's called Aricept. But their disease-modifying compound was approved January 6th, 2023, called Leqembi. And both Leqembi and donanemab currently are being administered by infusion, in other words, intravenously. So with Leqembi, it's every 2 weeks right now, and it may change over time. And with donanemab, I think it's every 4 weeks, but I'm not certain of that. But with Leqembi, there's also research going on right now, and the FDA is giving them, they call a rolling approval, to look at auto-injectors. So that would mean patients would not need to go into a healthcare professional every 2 or every 4 weeks to get the medicine. But the important thing that I want to share with your listeners is that, well, these are not platinum magic bullets. They do make a significant difference. In the New England Journal articles, it showed that Leqembi slowed the decline by about 27% and donanemab by about 38.6% on cognitive function and global function, day-to-day activities of daily living. And that's very significant if that's your loved one and they recognize their grandchildren longer, or can pay their own bills longer, or remain independent longer. These are I want to stop short of saying, hugely beneficial. They're not, but they are importantly beneficial. And those numbers I'm giving are averages. There's actually some people who do better, some don't get as much benefit, and you don't know. And to give full disclosure, there was an article in the paper yesterday, a well-known neurologist in Santa Monica, he won't give them to any of his patients because he doesn't believe there's a good risk-benefit ratio because there are some side effects. But the Alzheimer's Association and every patient advocacy group I know is elated that these medicines are now going to be available. They give hope and they do give legitimate help. So it really is finally a big, big step forward. And I believe will encourage additional research with other mechanisms of action for other types of etiology, for other types of dementia. So I think it's just going to open the floodgate, and at least that's my hope.
Yeah, and I think it really did re-energize the research community because it'd been over 20 years since we'd had any new breakthroughs. One question I have though is, as we're talking, I just want to make sure our listeners understand that Alzheimer's disease is a neurodegenerative progressive disease, so that you do unfortunately get worse over time. Tell us at what point these particular drugs are effective, and also what's the cost? Because I know there was a little bit of controversy over how much they cost and whether they'd be covered, by Medicare. What's the latest on that?
Yeah, it's a really timely question. There was a lot of controversy about that. With respect to the cost, I just looked it up this morning too. Donanemab, I'm not certain what cost that will come out at. Leqembi is about $26,000 per year. And while that's not inexpensive, if you look at the top 5 selling oncology drugs, they're north of 150,000. The top 5 selling arthritis drugs, they're north of 85,000 per year. The top 5 multiple sclerosis. There's at least 4 or 5 indications where these medicines are much, much more expensive than these medicines for the brain. So I do think to some extent, because we don't have a hard outcome measure, like if we look at asthma, your asthma attacks are down. If we look at diabetes, is your A1C down? Alzheimer's is more of a global function thing. So we've got multiple measures we look at. But I really think, as a taxpayer, for Medicare, which the Alzheimer's Association has done a splendid job advocating on patients' behalf for CMS to fully reimburse for these patients, and they're going to get that. But to your first question there, Sherri, who are these patients really looking at? Ironically, going back to use of the term MCI and early AD, those were the patients put in these trials for both Lilly and ASI. So people on that cusp of the earliest AD, maybe advancing rapidly, MCI, they did the best in the study. So then we get back again to the importance of early diagnosis and early intervention. There was a patient at a friend of mine's site in Florida. They had him on television the night Leqembi was approved. They showed his test scores. Obviously, he was an aberration, but they showed his test scores from when he began working with that research site from 4 years prior. He had 0 decline.
Wow.
So he helps their stats, and someone else maybe declined rapidly, which is why I get to everyone's chemistry is different. But on early diagnosis, we want early treatment, and that's what's most beneficial.
Well, and to that point and that message about early interventions, we all know that very often by the time someone's diagnosed, they probably have been living with the disease maybe between 10 and 20 years. And I just read a really great Wall Street Journal article that talked about the fact that Alzheimer's is not a disease of older people. It is a disease for everyone. And the way to think about it is when you start earlier in life with some of these lifestyle changes and things that you can do, then you're going to decrease your risk for later in life of maybe developing the disease. So let's talk about that. Let's dive in first. Dr. Wilcox, with you, the Lancet Commission came out with, some of these modifiable lifestyle choices. You mentioned a couple, live in a place hopefully where there's not a lot of pollution or food deserts. But what are some of the other things that our listeners can do to hopefully maybe prevent Alzheimer's or at least delay a diagnosis for them?
You bet. And the first 2 are ones we've all heard all of our life: diet and exercise, diet and exercise. And, it is amazing how what we eat does determine a lot of our brain health later on. There's a husband and wife couple at Loma Linda, the Shirzais, they're neurologists who have the Longevity Institute there, actually have a book about things we can eat, that are proper. So if we get away from potato chips and soda, and we have things like avocado and blueberries and olive oil, things like that, there are things we can do. Another kind of interesting thing that's been replicated, again, with research with the Alzheimer's Association, both throughout the US, but also in Finland and Norway, is midlife obesity. So midlife obesity is a huge risk factor, and it's modifiable. If we intervene earlier, then that's something we can do. A controversial one, although most people agree with it, but not everyone yet, is stress. We all know, even the people who don't say it's a direct causative factor for Alzheimer's, we do know, and everyone agrees, that stress is hard on our immune system. Many people do believe it's also a causative factor for, a risk factor for Alzheimer's, particularly sustained stress with no end in sight. Short-term stress, when you're working on a project, that can be actually good for us. But this long-term, sustained, no end in sight stress is bad for us.
Yeah. And I didn't mention earlier, and I'm going to hold it up because Dr. Wilcox, you are also the author of a wonderful book. And hopefully you can see this on the screen, Demystifying the Alzheimer's Maze. And you do mention nutrition like the Blue Zones. We've heard so much about the Blue Zones diet, which is based on the Mediterranean diet. And then the version of that called the Mind Diet, which is really supposed to be the best for brain health. But you mentioned stress. And Deborah, I want to turn to you because one of the things we also know is that our social fitness is sometimes as important as our physical or emotional fitness. And one of the things the Alzheimer's Association does that I just think is wonderful is creates a community. You have support groups. You make caregivers feel that they are not alone. And so often with this disease, there can still sometimes be stigma. Maybe our loved one has said, I don't want anyone to know if they have the diagnosis, and it makes it really difficult. It's also such a different type of disease because the behavior change, the memory loss, the issues that can happen make it really tough on caregivers. Tell us a little bit about the types of supports and education and hopefully the de-stress tools that you can give to caregivers.
Well, I 100% agree that nobody should face Alzheimer's alone. And we are here to help 24/7 with, our helpline. You mentioned our support groups. We have support groups across the country, both in person and virtual. We have support groups that meet for individuals who have early onset. So those who maybe just been diagnosed, there are special support groups for those individuals. There are support groups for the caregivers because they really do need the help. They need to know that they're not alone. They need to be able to talk through what they're going through and be able to hear about different resources that maybe others have in their community. And anybody who's listening can go onto our website, which is alz.org. And in the search bar, they can search for support groups in their local community. So that's an easy way to find them. They can also call our 800 number, which is 800-272-3900, and they can find support groups that way. We also offer a myriad of videos on our website and our YouTube channel that are really great resources, from knowing the 10 warning signs to doing financial planning to healthy eating. So we have a lot of resources on our website as well. We also have education programs that are happening pretty much every day across the country, online and in person, again, in a variety of languages. So anybody who's listening can find out about those resources on our website.
Yeah, and I think it's such a tremendous help. Again, caregivers often express this sense of, I feel all alone in my caregiving journey. And I think that's particularly true for people who are caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's dementia. We also know the studies have been done that show that Alzheimer's and dementia caregivers have higher levels of stress, lower immunity and antibodies to fight things like colds and flus, and higher levels sometimes of depression. So all of those things are things we want to help you with, and the Alzheimer's Association is there for you. That's the community you can tap into, because a lot of these things we're talking about are lifestyle things that could lead to higher risk, right? So we want to help you now to manage that. It's been tremendous talking to both of you. We could probably stay on for a whole nother hour with all kinds of things, but I just want to ask, was there anything important we didn't cover that you feel the audience should know, or a takeaway for them?
The only thing I would say would be you cannot stress enough the importance of early diagnosis and early intervention. Then it empowers both the patient and the caregiver. And I believe, it's time now where people have legitimate reason to know that doing so can be beneficial to themselves and their loved ones.
Yeah, and I would say advocate, because we hear so many stories of individuals who don't get the proper diagnosis, or their physician may be uncomfortable with making an Alzheimer's diagnosis, or they may not know how to diagnose somebody with mild cognitive impairment. And if you're noticing changes in yourself or somebody that you love, keep advocating until you get the right answers.
Yeah, those are two really wonderful messages. We know that Alzheimer's disease can be very costly for families. Deborah, you mentioned the financial planning side of this, and giving that runway a longer time frame so that families can plan ahead, maybe better financially, is helpful. And also, as you said, advocating. I've always said, let's get past the stigma. Let's make sure that we're supporting others who may come out and say, my loved one has Alzheimer's, and be an advocate and a mentor and a supporter for all of that, which is wonderful. Well, again, you both have shared so much wonderful, great information with our audience, but tell us again, I'll start with Deborah, where can our listeners find more information about the Alzheimer's Association?
Two places, alz.org. Our website also can be translated fully into Spanish. We're looking to do that in other languages as well. So that would be alz.org/Espanol. So chock full of resources there. And then our 800 number, 1-800-272-3900.
Wonderful. And Dr. Wilcox, where can our listeners follow up with you and find more information?
Just through the Alzheimer's Association would be best. Everything through that.
Great. As you are as a board member, exactly. You're a great supporter of that. Well, again, thank you both for being on this special segment that we're doing around Alzheimer's and Brain Health Awareness Month. It was great to talk to both of you.
Thank you, Sherri.
Thank you, Sherri, for having us.
So wasn't that great information from Deborah Levy and Dr. Wilcox on Alzheimer's? I mean, there's so much more we could have talked about, as I mentioned, but lots of really good information, I think, to take away, to think about, have a conversation with your family, but always know that the Alzheimer's Association is there to support you as a caregiver. So let's turn now to Well Home Design news. And we have so much on this episode. I'm not going to do a whole lot in this segment, but I did want to just mention quickly that, again, part of my book was about our environments and how we can maximize our environmental wellness for healing and for health. And I do a webinar on dementia friendly design. I also do one on more general age friendly design. But this one is very specific for caregivers of those with Alzheimer's. And I wanted to offer it for free as kind of a public service during this month of National Alzheimer's and Brain Health Awareness Month. So we're going to have a link to that dementia friendly design, home design webinar on our episode guide page. You can check that out. Also just wanted to mention some news that is related, I think, to just overall social fitness that we've been talking about, social wellness, and that's helping our older loved ones stay engaged. And sometimes when they're not driving anymore, or they're just a little bit less mobile, they don't kind of get out of the house and do enough. And if we're working, it's difficult because we can't, maybe be there to take them places. So Uber recently, the rideshare company Uber, just recently announced a caregiver app. Very interesting. They've been working with health systems now for a long time, but this is a very specific move by Uber to kind of capture the attention, I think, of family caregivers. Hopefully the Uber drivers and fleet of cars will certainly be more open to the needs of family caregivers and their older adults, because I know in the past, a lot of them won't pick up people with a walker or a wheelchair. And that's where I really love another app and service called GoGo Grandparent. Because GoGo Grandparent works with Uber as well as Lyft and other rideshare companies, and they serve as a concierge service where they will follow the adult for you via GPS, make sure they get picked up and dropped off properly, and they also work with drivers who have signed an agreement to pick up someone who might need help in and out of the car, who has a walker or a wheelchair they can put in the trunk. So you may want to check that out, but I just thought that was interesting news because, again, it's another avenue for us as family caregivers to think about. Is this another solution to help us keep our older loved ones kind of socially active and engaged, which we know helps overall health? Now, also, June is National Employee Wellness Month. And I wrote in my book, there's a whole chapter around intellectual wellness. And part of that chapter is around life-work balance, not work-life balance. I flip it, life-work balance, because I feel like life should come first and then work. But how do we find better balance? And part of the conversation and the writing that I did for that was in this area of biophilic design, which biophilic means love of life, love of nature. Biophilia, it's a Greek word. And it's really about bringing nature inside. We're seeing so much more of this. I was just at a restaurant the other day, and there were trees, inside the restaurant, beautiful windows looking outside on some beautiful shrubbery. There were wonderful, gorgeous wood panels along the ceiling. Really gave you a sense of comfort. And you felt it. The minute you walked into the restaurant, you just kind of felt like, take a deep breath, kind of I'm in a garden or a forest area. So it really does have a lot to do with how our brains work. And biophilic design is something, if you haven't heard of it, you are going to hear a lot about it over the next 10, 20 plus years, because it is the new movement in office design, restaurant design, commercial design, and home design. And so I'm going to share an excerpt from my book on biophilic design, and also a couple articles that I wrote for PBS Next Avenue that I'll share with you that talk about how do you find biophilic design on a budget, and some other advantages to incorporating that into both our homes, but also our loved ones' homes as well, and our offices. If, again, HR people out there, employees out there who are listening, let's bring more of that into the office environment to make it more welcoming and comforting and brain soothing. So with that, I'm now going to turn to our Me Time Monday Wellness Hack. And as I mentioned, June is World Music Month. So we're going to share with you some insights into musical menus and sonic seasoning, which are terms that I wish I had coined, but actually Dr. Charles Spence at the University of Oxford, who is a gastrophysicist, and you're going to learn what that's about. He coined those terms, and we're going to share with you the power between dining and eating and music, and how it can really help our health and certainly our brain health. And that's our Me Time Monday Wellness Hack for you for this month. Here we go. Welcome to our Me Time Monday Wellness Hack. This episode, we focus on musical menus and sonic seasoning from research in my book, Me Time Monday. Researchers found there is a brain-music connection, where studies show listening to music can reduce anxiety, blood pressure, and pain, as well as improve sleep quality, mood, mental alertness, and memory. Recently, Charles Spence at the University of Oxford is leading new research in gastrophysics, combining dining with music. Using music and other multisensory inputs such as taste, smell, and visual cues on lighting and visual decor, Spence can trick the brain into tasting foods in different ways, making them sweeter or more savory. He calls this brain rewiring hedonistic transfer effect, where he can create musical menus and sonic seasoning. Restaurants have long used background music to engage diners into eating and drinking more for decades. Now, the food industry is taking this music plus eating connection seriously. British Airways worked with food scientists such as Spence to create the Soundbite menu, which is a music and food pairing, because food loses 30% of its taste appeal on planes. The study showed that the passengers actually enjoyed the meal and felt it tasted 38 to 40% better when eating a meal paired with music. In Italy, there's an app to scan a wine label, and it will give you the perfect music track to listen to while drinking that wine that has shown you will enjoy the wine more. And Spence is working with assisted living and memory care communities to improve the dining experience for older adults where age and medications can affect our taste buds. For instance, in Spence's research, by listening to lower pitched sounds such as drums, cellos, or baritone singers such as Johnny Cash, Frank Sinatra, Nina Simone, or Karen Carpenter, the food you eat will taste 38% more savory. This is great news for people with higher blood pressure who need to reduce the salt in their diet. Simply by listening to certain types of music, your brain thinks the food is saltier or more savory. The opposite happens when listening to high-pitched sounds such as a tinkling piano or sopranos such as Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, Christina Aguilera, and Taylor Swift. With these higher tones, the food can taste up to 25% more sweet, which is great news for those who are dieting or who need to manage their sugar and insulin levels, such as people with diabetes. When it comes to music genres, scientists have discovered that jazz music makes any meal taste better. Johns Hopkins medical researchers asked jazz and hip-hop artists to play music while getting a functional MRI. And they found the musicians' brains lit up like fireworks going off. The music is cross-training the brain, since playing or singing along to music triggers different regions of the brain to work in harmony. Sleep science shows that foods such as cherries, kiwis, and milk, including oat or almond milk, as well as nuts and fatty fish like salmon, can increase melatonin that helps you get to sleep. Just remember not to eat or drink at least 3 hours before bed. When eating these foods and listening to classical music before bedtime for 10 days, a study found women had more restorative sleep and slept longer for the next 30 days. Music is the soundtrack of our memories, but also our physical and mental health. We hope you enjoyed this Me Time Monday Wellness Hack. Each episode of our Caregiving Club On Air podcast features a new Me Time Monday Wellness Hack. You can find these and more in my new book, Me Time Monday, the weekly wellness plan to find balance and joy for a busy life. Or you can also visit MeTimeMonday.com or CaregivingClub.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Caregiving Club On Air. Please hit the subscribe button to listen to us on our newest channels, Amazon Music, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, Pandora, as well as Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, and other listening channels. Check out all the resources and article links on our episode guide page at caregivingclub.com. Just hit the podcast tab at the top and email us with comments and questions at podcast@caregivingclub.com. Thank you again for listening. Take care and stay well.